This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
John, and I was just thinking that one of my holiday plans was to go and hit some of the nightclubs in Damascus, and I'm clearly not going to be able to do that.
And by hit the nightclubs in Damascus, of course, you mean, with AK-47s or with cruise missiles?
No. Tearing it up on the dance floor, of course.
Of course. Big mover and shaker that you are.
Indeed.
That's been quite guess we should get straight into it. That's been quite a week.
It has. And you've got to understand that you have to show respect for the U.S. deep state in terms of their ability to pull out all of the stops just in the final months of the year and the final months of the Biden presidency. So we've got regime change in Syria, fairly dramatic, and I'm sure we're going to have lots to say about that. We've had an election overturned in Romania. I probably have a different take on that, but yeah. Okay, and we've got the inability of the elected government in Georgia, this is the country Georgia as opposed to the state of Georgia in the U.S., to drive the president out of office, and the president there happens to be a French citizen and a former diplomat. And all of these things are coming together very quickly. Also across in Philippines, there's been a dramatic public distancing between the president and the vice president. And, again, that's an interesting thing because the vice president is the daughter of the previous president. And
I know nothing about this.
And the president is the son of a former president. So so Marcos's kid is the president. Duterte's daughter is the vice president. And the interesting thing in that part of the world is that they are separate elections for the president and vice president.
And power?
Well, the power is still almost completely in the hands of the president, but I think that is now becoming the point of contention. Yes, very much so.
Okay, so let's dig straight down. We've got. You very much feel that Syria is just CIA happenings.
Sure.
But I want to maybe throw into the mix that there's a lot that's gone down in the Middle East in the past year and 2 months, really. And so there was an escalation October 7, 2023, quite the escalation to say the least. Everyone knows about that. Some people still seemingly want to deny it. But there was a massive escalation, terrorist attack, etc. And then Israel retaliated. That resulted in the Gaza war, which fortunately the DA and the ANC stuck together this past week and voted to continue prosecuting their case at the ICJ. Well, it's the ANC's case and more importantly, Naledi Pandor's case. But the DA saw fit to allow 90 million rand to be spent on that said case. So that's just a side point.
Right now, I don't have a clue what the DA is up to. They're just being so stupid at so many levels. And
you see, Kanthan, of course, what happens in 2029 is that the ANC will go and vote for you, you see. So you don't have to worry. It's not your voters who will vote for you. No, the ANC will walk into the ballot box and put an X next to your party. So no stress. If you're following the ANC's hymn sheet, you can just trust them to vote for you. So that's what the DA is currently doing. But so we obviously had all of that happen. And then a few months ago, as we discussed, we had this brilliant operation with the pages that went down with regards to Hezbollah. Israel clearly far better prepared for that attack on Hezbollah. Obviously woke up a lot after October 7th and started paying proper attention.
You see, my take on that was that the Hezbollah thing had actually been in the pipeline for a long time. And if anything, I think the Hezbollah operation was temporarily derailed because of the need to focus attention on Gaza. And I think that fortunately, in the case of Israel, and I'm saying this from their perspective, they did not drop the ball in terms of keeping their focus on needing to actually get that Hezbollah situation under control once and for all. But it also, at the same time, gives you an indication of why there was suddenly a brokered ceasefire in terms of the Hezbollah setup. Clearly, because Israel was aware of what was going to come down in terms of Syria.
Okay, so just to get, I don't want to belabor too long, but the summary continues that the Hezbollah thing happens with the pages, followed by pretty much an all-out attack on Hezbollah by Israel and reciprocation by Hezbollah. Let's not forget the soccer field and the kids that were dead and all that stuff. So there's a war breaks out essentially between those two parties. Hezbollah is quickly dismantled, and as you say, there's some sort of peace settlement which happens 10 days ago now. Well, a ceasefire, not a peace settlement. But in the meantime, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that goes on in terms of Israel directly attacking Iran, Iran directly attacking Israel, which we haven't really seen before. And everyone felt that was going to be an escalation into World War III. I never really believed that was going to occur. But what you had in the middle of all of this was Syria. And Syria is an interesting case because Hezbollah operates in Lebanon had operated with relative impunity, even though they're not the government. And they clearly are funded by Iran. They clearly have very tight links to Iran. But they operate in a country that's not theirs, that they don't have control over. Syria is different because Syria is a state which was run by Assad. Assad has good friends in Tehran, good friends
but again,
in Moscow.
we must pause there, because when we say it was run by Assad, so Syria for the longest time has been fragmented, and so Assad had nominal control of the legal entity that was the Syrian state. But at the same time, you had an entire swathe of territory that was under the control of Turkey, and is still under the control of Turkey. You have Kurdish rebels, the PKK, who are funded by the United States, who have control of a chunk of territory. You have the United States themselves, who have a military base on Syrian territory. Again, this is not authorized by any UN resolution, but the US has the ability to do whatever they want in these cases, and so they happen to have a base out there as well. And so at the same time, you've had this entire group, which was basically ISIS, that was funded by the CIA in its various forms. And so you have these various components. So, PKK and ISIS are clearly not friends, but, they're both being funded by the US.
All right, important to say, the logic being we fund the ISIS guys because they fight against Assad, and Assad is a friend of Tehran and Putin and the American deep state, therefore sees, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Well, it's actually more complicated than that, simply because of the fact that the U.S. has control of the most rich oil fields in the northern part of the country. And more importantly, the U.S. has actually been helping themselves to the oil from there. And the oil is basically extracted there, and it's shipped out through Iraq. Yeah. And that's been the case for the longest time. And, of course, that's done with the cooperation of the Iraqi government. So, but the crucial thing to understand is that these guys that have been, particularly the ISIS guys, and by extension, the people who call themselves the White Helmets, who are now the people who are effectively the government in that place. And I wanted to just read very briefly from something that I wrote in 2013 when someone asked me what's going on in Syria. And I said, well, in case you missed it, here's the essence. Rebels filmed one of its leaders, Abu Sakar, mutilating the corpse of a Syrian army soldier with a knife and eating the dead man's heart. As he does so, his comrades chant, "I swear to God we will eat your hearts and your livers, you soldiers of Bashar the dog." Allahu Akbar. And so now you've had Human Rights Watch, which is hardly a fan of, but they're quoting the U.S. Mirror, saying in the UK Mirror newspaper that they've seen the unedited copy of the video, and all of their sources have confirmed Sakar's identity, and that Abu Sakar had instructed his men to slaughter the Alawites and take their hearts out and eat them. Now, the Alawites are Assad's clan, so they're a sect of Islam. That so if you have to do a pecking order in terms of how Islam is divided up, you have overwhelmingly the Sunnis as the majority, followed by the Shiites, and then to a lesser extent you have the Alawites, who at a number of levels are the most westernized sector of Islam, if you can put it that way. And so you've had Assad for the longest time. Remember, he came into this job by accident.
Yeah.
Because his father dies. His brother, who is supposed to be taking over and running the family business, as in the country, wipes himself out in a car crash. And so Bashar al-Assad at the time, he's an ophthalmologist working in London, a successful ophthalmologist. His wife is an investment banker working out there. And now suddenly he has to leave and pitch up and manage, frankly, which is best described as a shit show for the longest time. But to the point that you and I have discussed here previously, none of us like Assad. So let's start off.
Yeah, I just want to make quite clear, because I had this, it wasn't really a debate, but I saw some commentary on a WhatsApp group I'm on, to the extent of, the logic was the new guys that are in charge in Syria are worse than Assad.
Exactly.
And I think that's true.
And that's always been our point.
But before we get to that, I think it's important to say that I'm not here to whitewash Assad.
No.
Assad is a bad dude. He did bad things. Okay. He in a civilized world where hopefully everyone acts above board, which we know is not the case, but in a civilized world where hopefully everyone acts above board and follows some sort of well agreed upon general rules of society, Assad is not that guy.
Sure. And let's have and we can draw exactly the same parallel in terms of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. We can draw exactly the same parallel in terms of Muammar Gaddafi. And
Vladimir Putin?
Putin's an entirely different case, because when you have a nuclear power that's able to extend a middle finger to everyone, it's an entirely different scenario. But so let's park Putin and let's park Xi Jinping for the same reason, because would I want to live in Red China? The answer is no. So, and again, for the very specific reason that there are policies in place that are anathema to my existence. Free speech kind of being at the top of that list.
Yeah.
But is it true that in the grand scheme of things, Assad is less of an evil than the guys who have now taken over? And the answer to that for me is yes. So the interesting thing from my perspective in terms of what's going to be happening in that part of the world right now is that you're going to have the Turks effectively taking land on their border, and they're going to keep that, and it's never going to go back to Syria, because they're going to be determined to wipe out the Kurds at all possible costs.
That's my concern.
Yeah, so park that on one side. But the more interesting thing from my perspective is that Israel immediately moved and took out a significant chunk of the defense capability of Syria itself. And also at the same time, Israel has taken control of a significant chunk of territory in Syria. And again, I want to make this point.
It's significant in terms of what it is. It's not significant in terms of its size.
Yes.
It's a very small section of land.
But crucially,
yes.
Okay, what is important is that is it better for Israel to be controlling that land than the people who have now moved in, who ultimately, when no matter how much posturing they might put out, they are, in fact, completely committed to a jihadist agenda, which ultimately is going to be commitment to destruction of the state of Israel. And and so we need to be aware of all of these things that are playing themselves out right now.
Okay, but do you think the CIA did that? Before Trump came in, because they wouldn't have, he wouldn't have allowed it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and he would have left Assad alone.
Yes.
Right. So, what's your logic for why they did that? Because there'll now be jihadists on the border of Israel, so we might get our big war that we all want. Is that the logic?
So the obvious win is that it's very clear that Russia will now pull out from Syria.
Has pulled out.
Yeah, well, they're going through the process of dismantling their military base, and so they'll effectively be out of the running in terms of having a base in the Mediterranean, because this was their only foothold in the Mediterranean. So is that a win for the U.S.? Yes, can say that very definitely, which also means then that the U.S.'s own military presence in Syria is not under potential threat from Russia. The other crucial thing that happens as a direct result of this is that because of the fact that Assad was forced to strike this balance with the Iranians in order to ensure that the jihadists were not taking him out, because remember, the jihadists are enemies of the Iranians as well. That effectively meant that he was being held hostage, in that the Iranians were then able to funnel all of the arms and support to Hezbollah through his territory.
Yeah.
That now comes to a stop.
Yes.
Okay, which effectively means that Hezbollah, their arteries are severed. So
there's that. So there's a supply route has been severed. So Tehran can no longer easily resupply any of their allies in the region. The other thing which is interesting is that Israel has destroyed somewhere in the region depending on what you're talking about. So there's anti-air missiles. And there's a whole bunch of SAM sites essentially all over Syria, and they're specifically positioned to prevent any flyover Syria to get to Iran. And they're actually quite advanced weaponry. They come from Russia. And then there's a whole bunch of MiGs and all the other aircraft, helicopters, etc., that were owned by the Syrian military. And the Israelis have destroyed between 80 and 90% of that.
And in fact, there's been some very amusing video clips floating around of the jihadists now trying to get into these jets and start them up and fly them. And
oh, really?
Yeah, and I think
because you can just start up a MiG.
It's got to be freaking insane, you know. It's not dissimilar to what happened in Afghanistan after the US pulled out.
Yes, except the difference is that the Americans just left them working equipment, whereas 80 to 90% of the Syrian military stuff. But what's more important than that is because the Syrian military is dead. So as it was. It may reform under the jihadist government. I personally think the jihadist government will be toppled, put it that way. I don't know how that plays out, but Israel's not going to stand for that. But what's happened, and neither will Trump. The people in Trump's administration are as hawkish as they come on the Middle East. There's a number of people. His CIA director, Seb Gorka, he's got another Middle East advisor, I forget his name right now, but these are all very, very hawkish people who have no time for any kind of terrorism basis for leadership. So that's going to end very quickly under Trump. But what's happened now is that within a year of that starting point, year to 14 months of October 7th, Israel now has a direct line of sight to Tehran, to Iran. And which they never had before. It was very difficult if they had ever wanted to knock out all the nuke sites or begin a war with Iran or whatever it was. It always had to be done in a very clandestine fashion. It was always sort of through Mossad.
But consider, John, at the same time, the reverse also holds true, because previously Iran might have been reluctant to make use of Syrian territory to directly strike Israel. And now that they no longer have a vested interest in the Syrian regime, the same also holds true. So that's one of those things that actually cuts both ways. And what's going to be interesting is to see how it actually plays itself out over the next period. And I think that at the point at which Trump finally comes into office, there's going to be a complete rewrite in terms of the way all of this stuff gets to be played out.
Because, so I don't think there's going to be a war, and I don't think Israel's going to have to use that corridor.
I don't think that's going to be the case at all. And let's be very clear that Trump has always had an exceptionally good relationship with the Saudis, and he was very close to brokering the peace deal between the Saudis and
I think that will happen.
And Israel, and I think that will happen as well.
But the other thing that
but
happens,
the Saudis will no doubt be pleased that Assad is not there,
gone,
is now gone. So, yes, to a large extent, the Middle East situation is actually closer to a viable solution.
Yes, I agree with
now,
this.
As a direct
the other thing that happens is that I think Putin is going to have to come on side. So obviously there's the Ukraine issue, which will get sorted out. But then equally, I think Putin and Xi are going to basically be as part of the negotiations that happened between the US and those countries. Part of that will be like, look, you need to understand that Iran is not going to continue the way it has gone. The mullahs, their time is over. And you need to stop being part of the support network. And I think that will be encouraged to occur. And so I think you will see within the next year, Iran will become very isolated. This is why I don't think that corridor matters, because I don't think Iran gets to attack Israel because they're going to run out of cash and resource quite quickly, because a lot of that, from a military perspective, is provided by their friends. And if their friends are no longer their friends...
No, I disagree with that, because their manufacturing capabilities, and, you know, it goes back to the conversation that... Lavrov had with Tucker fairly recently. And the crucial thing that came out of that conversation for me is that he took the view that sanctions had actually been a bit of a boon to Russia because it enabled them to become self-sufficient at so many levels.
Okay, but Kanthan,
and everything...
This isn't true what you say. I'll tell you why. I'll give you. Okay, cool, no problem.
Yeah. So are you going to go down the washing machine?
Iran, no, I'm not going to go down the washing machine. I'm just going to turn around and tell you that Iran can't run an airline properly because when Airbus and Boeing refuse to provide them parts, they don't go and machine the parts. They can't find a way to do it internally. Neither can Russia, by the way. They all have to find little loopholes around, okay? And they send their planes to countries which don't have sanctions against them but have Airbus or Boeing repair sites or servicing centers which are third parties.
John, you're conflating issues that are...
I'm not. If you can't run a 737...
You're conflating issues that are necessary to run the country's economy.
No, hold on. I said a war. I said a war. I said Iran is not going to be able to launch a military offensive against Israel with any effect. Okay.
Only if
you said well, Lavrov explains.
You see,
but Lavrov doesn't explain. Lavrov also spoke so much propaganda in that Tucker podcast.
The age of fighter jets as being important in the case of war are long gone.
Yeah, but that is conflation.
Iran has already shown.
I'm not letting you skip this point.
No.
I'm not letting you. Iran hasn't shown shit.
Iran has shown that it's capable of taking out Israel if it wants to.
No, it hasn't. It hasn't at all in any way whatsoever. It hasn't at all in any way whatsoever.
In terms of those targeted strikes where they actually
Kanthan, I need you to stop for a second and listen. Right, here we go. I'm going to explain it to you. So first, let's go back to the first point that I made so we can get things in order. Iran is not going to launch a full-scale war against Israel, even a small-scale war against Israel, over and above what they've already done, their usual nonsense, because they're not going to be able to, because if you cannot service a 737, you cannot put...
It's a false correlation. Stop going down the 737.
You can go down the false correlation path and you can tear me to pieces when you've given me a couple of minutes to settle all of your points. Okay, you cannot run military aircraft, military cannons, military everything when you cannot run basic civil aviation. Okay, amongst other things. If you don't like the 737 example, we can go into other things.
Sucking that, and every bit of evidence shows the contrary, John.
I'm not sucking it at all. They can't service their aircraft. So if you can't service basic aircraft, you can't service tanks, and you can't service other things.
Iran was able to hit Israel with thousands of drones.
Iran. Sorry, Kanthan, just remind me, thousands of drones. How many got through? Thousands. No.
Yes.
Hundreds. No. 10. No.
Yes.
No.
Every single one of them that was necessary
so far,
to hit their targets.
Iran has hit Tel Aviv once, one drone, one building.
And which building did they
thousands,
hit? Which
out
building
of thousands
did they hit?
that they hit? I don't know.
They hit very specifically the Mossad headquarters, which is what they targeted.
No, Kanthan, they didn't hit Mossad headquarters because there aren't apartments in Mossad's headquarters.
And they showed that they were very carefully targeting.
Listeners, what you're going to need to do on this podcast is you're going to need to Google a lot because Kanthan's talking shit. But what I want to get to,
ad hominem attacks, John, are the worst possible way to conduct a conversation.
It's not ad hominem. Shit means he's talking stuff that's not true. And so what I'm saying is that check him on his facts and about these amazing drones. I agree with you. Then on your second point, fighter jets are over. I agree with you on that point, except fighter jets are not over because Iran is going to do something with them. Fighter jets are over because China might do something with them. The United States might do something with them. But Iran, not so much, not unless they're getting those things from people like China. All right. So I'm not worried about that from an Iran perspective either. And then let's just get to Lavrov quickly. I do invite everyone to go and listen to that interview. Where he claims that Russia is better off for having sanctions. Now, in some respects, they are, because it does do what he says, which is that it creates a sort of self-sufficiency. You're googling too hard. You're googling way too hard.
No, I'm not googling at all.
What website are you on?
I'm on kanthanpillay.com.
Oh, okay. He's googling himself.
I'm not googling myself. I keep sources listed out here. But carry on about Lavrov.
I will just say that interview was incredibly hilarious to me, because if you were watching that interview and you were a neutral party, Lavrov seems like a typical propagandist. Most of what he says, you can turn around and go, okay, but that on the face of it doesn't seem to be true. And so, of course, some of what he says is his perspective as Russians. But I listened to that and went, I bet you I could find someone from the State Department in the US to give the completely opposite explanation and make it sound just as legit. And you can just hear it in the interview. It's not about being genuine. It's not about truly representing anything. It's just about
John,
pushing a propaganda
perspective. Your feelings versus facts, yes.
No, I'm going into interpretation. You interpreted the interview as a positive interview.
No,
in which
I merely quoted what he said.
I
quoted what he said.
He said something which doesn't line up with reality.
The reality in this particular case is that the IMF has conceded that Russia's economy has overtaken all of the other major economies in Europe, so that it is now fourth place in the world after the top three, which is...
yes, but that's not because of an increase in the Russian economy, Kanthan. That's because of a decrease in the German and French economies, which happened because of all kinds of other things we've discussed on the podcast. So, and again, you have a country where basic stuff that happens in other countries, like Germany and France, can't exist. They don't have... easy access to the consumer goods that those countries have, that all Western countries have. They don't have access to the servicing of their equipment like those countries have.
You keep spouting all of this propaganda, and
it's not
amazing.
propaganda. It's not propaganda because if Russia was this major economy, then when I opened flight radar, there would be just movement of people all over and planes everywhere. It would be this yellow map of just aircraft in the air like the United States is or like Europe is. But it isn't. But it isn't because there isn't the economy that's claimed to be. There isn't the flights that are claimed to be. There isn't the trade that is claimed to be. Yes, when you are supplying tons and tons of oil and gas to countries who have been running psyops for years that nuclear is bad and we need to worship the climate cult, I acknowledge that when your largest industry is oil and gas, your economy will do quite well. It's the reason why I've been pushing for oil and gas in South Africa, because our economy would do very well as a result. But that doesn't imply that we would suddenly be a better country than other places. It doesn't imply that we wouldn't have reliance on external service providers like we currently do in this country for lots of things to do, especially engineering. And so when we start talking about conflict between two countries and we say, well, they'll just buckle down and they'll engineer within their own countries, that won't happen.
So let's
okay, your turn.
So we'll demarcate the points of separation at this point, all right?
Yeah.
You have a very clear view that Iran's economy is tanking and that they cannot survive.
We'll tank.
Okay,
we'll
right.
Tank.
And you have a similar view in terms of Russia. I have completely the opposite.
I don't
view.
have the same view in terms of Russia because
Okay.
there's a difference with Russia. I've
And the
just explained
difference
that.
is, yes.
But I've just explained their biggest industry is oil and gas.
And that's also the case in terms of Iran.
Yes, except the difference is during the first Trump. What happens during the first Trump term to Iran oil and gas?
Let me finish this.
Okay, go
all
on.
right. Okay. So we have this fundamental disagreement between us, and we're not going to resolve it. Okay. So let's just put this aside for now, because remember what we're trying to do is to unpack what's currently happening in that part of the world, and to map out what the likely path is going to be going forward. Okay, I'm very clear that Iran is not going to try and launch any attacks on Israel, not because of the fact that they're incapable of doing so, because I believe they are capable of doing so, but I am making the case that right now it's the worst possible thing for them to do while they are trying to carve out other relationships in other parts of the world. China has already brokered a peace deal between the Saudis and the Iranians for the first time. I think that the Iranians would be very reluctant to want to jeopardize that at any levels. The Iranians are also trying to carve out a relationship with all of the countries that have now been lining up to join BRICS. And again, they would not want to be jeopardizing those relationships going forward. So I'm saying that at that level, Iran is likely to behave itself. It's an entirely different thing for Iran to continue doing what it's always done in the past, which is to funnel money through to Hezbollah and to funnel money through to the Houthis. The Hezbollah side, as I pointed out, has now been crippled. Are they going to continue funneling things through to the Houthis? I think the answer to that is yes. But also, I think that the Houthi scenario is going to change quite dramatically at the point at which Trump comes into power. Because even though Trump has made it very clear...
This I agree with you.
Okay. And even though Trump has made it very clear that he's opposed to the idea of starting any new wars, let's be very clear that he will not allow American shipping to be attacked by the Houthis.
Or anyone shipping, in fact.
Well, no, but specifically American shipping. And
there's not many ships registered as American.
It doesn't matter. Anything that Trump would consider to be part of... John,
goods coming
just stop the fuck getting distracted by minutiae and try and focus on what I'm saying. If, in case you guys cannot see this, John is busy frantically on his phone.
I'm not Googling a thing.
Looking for information on...
I'm not.
Is that pictures of Syria?
No, it's not pictures of Syria
All
either.
right, but
no,
going back
I never cheat, you know that.
Yeah, going back to the question of the Houthis.
Yeah.
I'm very clear that at the point at which Trump is in power... If there is any attack from Houthis on shipping that's going through the Suez Canal, Trump will have no hesitation actually doing bombing runs all over the Houthi territories and absolutely flattening the territory.
No, I have to agree with that.
Yeah, I'm very clear. I'm very clear that he'd do that, and I'm saying at that level, the Houthis are going to back down.
I mean, look, reasonably, whether we agree on the why he would do that, the reality is he's not going to allow, and no one should in that position of power, he's not going to allow any small entity in the world to disrupt the whole flow of the world. and the economy. It's about trade. And at the end of the day, the fact that there's many ships now, thousands, that are now going past our coast, which unfortunately we haven't capitalized on, Mozambique has. But the fact that there are thousands of ships going around the whole of Africa instead of just going through their normal route, the Red Sea, etc., that is causing major issues, and it's creating a lot of inefficiency in global trade. So, which obviously has massive knock-on effects. I just don't see that being allowed. What else have you seen? Are you happy we died on the Middle East, even though with disagreement?
Well, we disagree in terms of Iran's capabilities, and I'm saying that you don't have a clue about Iran's capabilities. But that aside, I'm in agreement with you on the way in which it's going to play itself out.
All right, so I'll make a prediction because I don't have a clue about Iran's capabilities, but I'm very good at predicting stuff. So let's assume that maybe I do have a clue, and maybe I'm right. I will tell you that by the time Trump finishes this term, the mullahs will no longer exist in Iran, and Iran will have collapsed. And that would not have happened, in my opinion, if Iran was so industrious and capable.
So I think that I'm inclined to agree with you, but not for the reasons that you think. Okay, what's very clear to me is that the mullahs, by and large, are literally hanging on by a thread. Mm-hmm. And it's simply because of the fact that Khamenei is as old as he is. And is there likely to be a, quote, supreme leader, unquote, who takes over at the point at which he finally shuffles off this mortal coil? I don't think so.
Okay, so so you're saying if Khamenei, if he dies, then we get the change. But if he doesn't, we don't.
No. I'm saying that to a large extent the change is already happening in terms of the fact that you've had the opening up of relations between Iran and the Saudis. I think that Trump is going to play hardball with Iran, but he's not going to play hardball at the level of militarily. He is going to, I think, basically insist that there be a reopening of inspection of nuclear facilities in exchange for him allowing them to have a very guarded entry into the family of nations. And I think that that's going to be his playbook, because Trump is not the type of person who wants to get into expensive military operations. He wants to make deals.
I agree with you.
And he's good at making those deals. But I think that the mullahs are not going to be in power in 4 years' time, but I'm saying that is going to be the case immediately at the point.
And when they join the group of nations, as you put it, or however you said it, they will then be able to service their Boeings and Airbuses properly. And they won't do it because they manufactured the parts in their country. Although I will say that the Iranians, of all the countries in the Middle East, the Iranians next to the Israelis are probably the most industrious as a people.
Yes.
And I think that whether you're right about how it comes to be or I am, when Iran is eventually allowed to be Iran again, the Iran of the 70s, where there was a lot of freedom and people were allowed to just kind of live their lives and get on with it. A lot of engineers, in fact, globally, came from Iran. Very, very smart people. And I think when that happens and that opens up again, Iran will become a powerhouse of the region, which will be very interesting with the Saudis, because the Saudis won't like that at all.
And I'm just simply making the case that Iran has the highest intellectual capital in the Middle East after Israel. And
I think they're in front of Israel, actually.
Look, in terms of sheer numbers,
it's a population
thing. But that's just a population differential. But I'm saying that Iran already has that intellectual capital in place, and that industriousness has played itself out in terms of its developments around drone technology. And there's so many things that happen. But going back to my point, I do agree with you that there's going to be an overall decline of the power of the mullahs, and that can't happen too soon.
Okay, finally we got to a point of agreement.
No, but we've always been in agreement around that point.
Everyone's been holding their breaths. All right, good. All right, let's leave them. Should we leave the Middle East for a bit?
Let's leave the Middle East.
I mean, do you want to talk a little bit more about any of the other stuff you mentioned? You talked about the Philippines. There's also Slipped my mind. Other place.
So there's Georgia, there's Romania.
It's Romania. Let's talk about the Romania thing.
Okay.
Because that's interesting.
Yes.
And I don't think it's as simple as it's kind of been put out there. So as far as I can tell, the two sides are something to the effect of there was a guy called Georgescu. I forget. I apologize for getting the name wrong. I won't say it properly. But this is an unknown. He was polling at somewhere around 6%. And then there was a massive kind of social media buy or push. And suddenly he polled over 20%, which because they have multiple candidates would be enough to put him into a runoff. Okay. And so you had this nobody who suddenly shot up. And the two sides
No, he actually wasn't a nobody. And you see, because you might remember that I spoke about him on, in fact, it was the last Overton Pod. I spoke about the fact that he had run.
Nobody in relative terms, Kanthan. I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't involved in the political space.
Look, I'm saying that in the Romanian context,
yes,
he's certainly well known. And, what was significant about the campaign and I made very specific mention of the fact that there was a particular video of his that went viral that showed him diving into an ice-covered lake and swimming across to the other end of it and saying things to the effect that his faith had carried him across and that he was going to bring that back to Romania. And the extent to which that image of him coming across as a strong, determined leader versus all of the other...
Right. So that's the one side of the argument.
All of the other soy boys that have been putting out.
So that's the one side is he genuinely was propelled to this position where he could become the president of Romania in a very real and honest fashion, just by putting himself out there. Okay, fine. The other side of the argument being, which is what the Constitutional Court in Romania went with, or the Supreme Court, I'm not sure what they're called exactly, but they went with, no, there was outside funding for this guy, which paid for basically him to get boosted on social media. And so it was never viral organically. It went viral as a result of funding. And that funding came from Russia. Okay, those are the two sides. One, it's organic. One, it's inorganic. Okay. And then we have the court basically annulling the result and saying we need to do this all over again. And of course, then people react based on their previous biases. So they like him. You're just overruling democracy because you can't control it.
You see, the interesting thing is that he was not elected president. Okay, he ended up being a candidate with the plurality of the votes. So now the question is, so there needed to be a runoff, effectively, in terms of the elections. And the court is basically saying, no, we're not going to have a runoff. We're going to run an entire process all over again. Now, so the question that you then need to ask yourself is, what is the necessity of, because a runoff surely would just simply imply that you would still end up having a democratic process in place, even though you might have exposed money coming into the country. And let's be very clear. The single biggest source of funds that have been going into these countries has come from the Western world for the longest time, because that has been their playbook. I mean, that's exactly what the National Endowment for Democracy does. That's what USAID does. They come in on the basis of these NGOs, and they.
So can I ask? You saying that's wrong?
No, I'm not saying it's wrong.
Okay,
I'm saying
it happens.
I am saying that control of the courts in these territories is not the simple thing that it used to be, any more than control of the courts in our country is as simple as it used to be. When you consider right now that we've had effectively a judge deciding that South Africa is not going to be able to exploit our coal resources going forward.
Yeah, we must talk about that.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that it's not a question of whose side you take. It's not a question of whether it's right or wrong. Mm-hmm. Am I saying that the U.S. has effectively finessed a scenario where, all things else being considered, there would have been a runoff election, and there's a strong possibility that this guy would have won. I'm not saying it's a certainty. I'm saying there's a strong possibility. So that's an example of where it's very clear to me
but
that
this is where the hypocrisy, I have a problem with the hypocrisy that comes up here.
which hypocrisy?
Because, I'm going to explain it to you. Allow me to explain. Okay? National democracy, US aid, they're influencing Russia, Romania, and a whole bunch of other countries. And I don't actually disagree with that. I agree that I've long called for all external funding that is political to be banned in all countries. Okay. But that happens currently. It's not banned. And they have influence. All I'm seeing is what happened here in reverse. And I've spoken to Romanian people. What happened here in reverse is that Russia did exactly the same thing. Okay? Because the idea that America runs these kinds of ops, and we all agree and believe with that because we watch Tucker Carlson and he's the master of truth. They do it, but the other side doesn't do it. And when America does it, it's wrong. But when Russia does it, it's not wrong. So what I'm saying, what I see
there's a bit of false equivalence here, and I'll tell you the false equivalence. I've no doubt that Russia tries to do that. But also understand that the logistics of Russia being able to infiltrate Romania, which is an EU territory where the financial system is effectively under the control of the US government, and to be able to get in sufficient amounts of funding in order to be able to influence the outcome there, that's a psyop. I'm not buying it at all.
So I'll tell you why it's not a psyop, because the way they did it was through TikTok. Because do you know where Georgescu got his votes?
Yeah. A bulk of it came from TikTok.
I don't know about from TikTok, but the bulk of it came from 18 to 24-year-olds who, by the way, weeks earlier, he'd been polling at far lower numbers. And then Russia, this is the allegation, Russia piled a lot of money into TikTok, which is not hard to do. You don't have to go through the EU to do that. Russia piled a lot of money into TikTok on his behalf.
That's exactly what the Democrats said. That's what the Democrats said in terms of Trump.
And then what happened was...
Because remember, Trump picked up votes among 18 to 24s.
Sure. And then what happened is, this time around, the Democrats have not claimed that Trump stole the election or Russia influenced the election.
No, because it was too big to steal this time.
But the point is that this guy who had been polling, no one has, as far as I can tell, has disagreed with the polls. Who had been polling at a percentage. The change is irrelevant because I don't trust polls. It's fortune telling. But the point is the change is significant. And so the guy who had been polling at 5 or 6%, who suddenly got the majority of the 18 to 24-year-old vote, after it appeared as if Russia or Russian actors or whatever you want to do had invested in targeting that specific group. That is the reason why, and that was the reason given, by the way, by the court for why the annulment occurred. And so all I'm saying is if one side is wrong, so is the other side.
You keep using phrases like right and wrong. And I'm not making a value judgment here. I'm merely pointing out that it's very clear to me that does the US have disproportionate influence over the legal system in Romania? Yes. Do they have the same in terms of what goes on in Tbilisi, Georgia? Yes. Is the same thing currently in place in terms of Marcos as the person who's in charge of...
See, I'm going to make value judgments, though, Kanthan, and I think you're wrong not
I'm very happy with you making value judgments. I'm merely pointing out that these things are happening.
And morals, and so I'm going to spend my whole life doing that.
Yes.
But, and you can look at things and go, no big deal. This is the same argument I was having with the Assad people, going, well, Assad wasn't so bad, and these guys are much worse. And I was going, yes, these guys are much worse, but Assad was murdering and torturing people. So frankly, I don't really. We'll have to see where things go now. I hoped I wouldn't have ended it this way, but I'm also not like mourning Assad, which some people seem to want to do. At the same time, with Georgia, I'm able to say any external influence, I don't think America should have that influence, but I also don't think Georgescu should have the influence. And then, of course, there's the part where I don't know if you've studied Georgescu at all, other than a video of him diving into an ice lake, okay? But the guy is, for example, a Holocaust denier. So I wouldn't very happy he hasn't got there. Why? It's a value judgment, of course.
If you're suggesting for a second that I would be happy with Georgescu,
I know you, of course not.
That I would prefer having Georgescu in place as the person.
I'm trying to make the argument. Please make value judgments.
No, my value judgments.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I do make those value judgments. For example, pointing out that.
I know you do. That's why I think it's weird. That's why I think it's weird in this instance.
But remember, what we are trying to do is to unpack what's happening in the world in the run-up to Trump actually coming into office, and where all of the pieces are on this global chessboard at the time right now. And this is a significant piece in terms of what's going on in Romania, because Romania is going to be a crucial piece of the puzzle when it comes to resolution of what goes down in Ukraine. So, and the way in which that actually ends up playing itself out is going to be determined by what government happens to be running Romania by the time negotiations finally come about. And negotiations will really only come about at the point at which Trump comes into office.
Yeah.
So that's a significant chunk. Ditto in the case of what's happening in Georgia. It's also going to be a crucial piece of the puzzle, because does Russia view a possible entry of Georgia into the NATO sphere of influence as an existential threat? Yes. And is there a possibility for another Ukraine-type scenario to go down in that part of the world? Absolutely. So all of these pieces of the puzzle are what's crucial. It doesn't matter whether who I think should be the president.
Well, now you just made me want Georgescu to lose even more. I'm even more happy about the annulment now. The thing is that I think you can either look at the world.
I think that you are getting unusually obsessed with Georgescu at this point, and that given that we have a relatively small amount of time ahead of us, because we need to give up the studio shortly, we should actually move away from Georgescu.
That's fine. We can move away.
Because we mapped out exactly.
But
we've mapped out.
Well,
where
we don't know where it's going,
puzzle.
do we?
No, but you're good at making predictions, John. So make a prediction.
No, I don't know enough about. I don't know enough about Romania. What I do know is that because I don't know enough about Romania, when this happened, I went and read a hell of a lot from the mainstream media, but also from people who are not the mainstream media. And of course, I read all the people on the right who were very upset because they Americans specifically do this quite a lot. So anything that happens anywhere else in the world, they Americanize it, and then they assume that that's a similar scenario. But they don't understand that very few countries operate like the United States. So, a court ruling in another country is not equivalent, a high court ruling in another country is not equivalent to a SCOTUS ruling, because the entire process to, for example, get to SCOTUS is completely different. And the American approach to law and order, justice, etc., is done very differently. So when they then go and you see, this is the same as the justice system targeting Trump. It's not. And so when you go read about Georgescu, and you go read about the Romanian system, and you go read about the polling, and
John,
you go read
I'm
about
going to interrupt
the voting.
you, because again, you're wasting precious time that we should be talking about real things, pontificating about what's going on in that part of the world.
All I'm saying is, which is what you, again, got me going on that rant, right? You wanted me to give a prediction, and I said I didn't know enough, but I'd gone and read all of this information. And so the problem is if you only see one side of that, of it, and it's your side that you follow, it's your echo chamber, because we all have them, and they're good things. I like echo chambers. Okay? We can have that discussion another time. I think everyone creates echo chambers, and the idea that they're a bad thing is stupid. You choose your friends based on having an echo chamber you like. You choose where you work based on that.
You're wasting a lot of time just going down a philosophical argument.
It's okay. We can have philosophical discussions here.
Where do
you want to go to?
Which
Kanthan?
I'm very happy to do at the point at which we've got our regular 2 hours in the studio, but we don't today.
Where do you want to go next?
So, are we done in terms of the geopolitics at this point?
Well, I can't promise, but go ahead with where you want to go next.
Okay, I'll just want to say this much in terms of Assad. And
Are we done with the geopolitics?
No, this is not the geopolitics. And I want to quote something that John Simpson had to say.
Okay.
And John Simpson, you might know, is a BBC correspondent. He's probably one of the few veterans in the field.
Rings a very small bell. I've heard the name before.
Around. Well, if you've ever flown British Airways, John Simpson has written a column in the British Airways magazine going back for the longest time. But he's been there for almost every significant geopolitical event. So, he was there at Tiananmen Square. He was there at the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Got you.
I consistently disagree with a lot of his takes on the way things go about. Great deal of respect for him, though. He's an exceptionally good writer, and you'll still get him on BBC very often. And he's actually met Assad a couple of times, and he made the very specific point that you and I were both making, that Assad has done really terrible things in terms of running of the country. But he also made the very specific point that Assad was, to his mind, never a person whose heart was really in this thing. It had kind of been thrust upon him. He clearly didn't have the same bloodlust that his father did, as a very specific example, and just lacked shall we say, the backbone to actually be running this entire process. And I think the interesting thing for me was at the point at which Assad said, "That's it, I'm out of here," which is actually what went down. And the Iranians were saying to him, "But listen, we're on standby. We've got your back. We can come in." And he just said, "Sorry, I'm out of here." And I suspect to a large extent the reason why Assad ended up doing that is the fact that his wife's health has been very poor for a while now. And I was looking at, at the time when Assad went on a state visit to China, less than a year ago, I think it was. And I saw an entirely different Assad at that point, because it's the first time that I've known the guy, again through the media, that I saw him actually smiling and actually seeming to be in good spirits. He was walking through the Great Wall of China, holding his wife's hand. And, there was almost the sense of, this is a guy who's having a holiday for the first time since 2007, which is the point at which he suddenly got thrust into this this environment. And all of the feedback that was coming from his time as an ophthalmologist in the UK, which is where he was, all of the people who worked with him said that the guy was an exceptionally good doctor. He had a tremendous relationship with his parents. And now, at the point at which he says that, he's giving up on this stuff for good, and he's setting up ophthalmic hospitals, first in Russia and then in the UAE, with a view to actually providing free healthcare to people who need it in various parts of the world. I just want to say that it's a far better way to step down than to end up the way Saddam Hussein did, dangling at the end of a rope. And, does it in any way excuse the stuff that went down in Syria under his watch? No. But I think that I will say kudos to the guy at the point at which the Iranians said, "We're willing to come in on your side and unleash war upon these guys." And he said, "No, I'm out of here."
All right. I won't disagree with you, although I do, but I'll just leave it and let it go. Okay. Let's talk about this judge who has made a nonsensical ruling. It's not going to stand, but...
Well, I don't know about it not going to stand, because, is the Supreme Court of Appeal going to allow it to continue at the point at which
I don't.
It gets escalated?
Just to give background, a judge ruled that essentially coal power is illegal because it denies future generations of a clean environment. But I can only imagine the judge is not a very smart human being, or the arguments put in front of him were very, very poor, because there's a number of issues with that. I mean, firstly, you have to weigh things in the law. That's what judges have to do. And so saying you can't have coal power because it threatens the environmental safety of future generations has to be, if that were true as a statement, which I'll get to, if that were true as a statement, then you have to weigh that against the prosperity and safety of the Kanthan cell phone. You have to weigh that against the prosperity of current generations, which includes those future generations. And then, of course, you have the statement that coal power threatens the environmental sort of safety of future generations. How? How exactly? That pollution is gone, to start off with. Secondly, they're not very pollutant any longer because of all the technology that's been applied to that sector. And yeah, so I do hope it does go to the Supreme Court of Appeals and there are better arguments. And someone, comes out with a slightly better ruling. Just ridiculous.
So my take on what's going down right now is that do I believe that we'll be able to build up new coal in a short space of time? Sorry, in a shorter space of time than it would take to roll out small modular nuclear reactors? I think the answer to that is with the speed at which nuclear is going to be adopted over the next period, we're probably better off putting our money into nuclear at this point. At the same time, the idea of legislation from the bench, which is effectively what this is something that I completely disagree with, because it's not for the courts to be deciding our energy policy. It never should be. And of course, the problem that we have is that a lot of the influence that ends up going before the courts, again, comes from these NGOs, and they're foreign-funded NGOs.
Yeah, just a bit of madness that was, and as I say, hopefully we're both on the same page. I wouldn't rule out coal. I would be building coal if I ran the country. We'd be building coal-fired power plants. I'm not waiting for nuclear reactors to get here in 10 or 15 or 20 years. Maybe quicker, but I'm not waiting on the chance. And neither is China. And neither is India. All of those economies are investing heavily in fossil fuels because that is, until now.
And look, the fact is that all of our coal is being shipped off to other parts of the world right now. Mm-hmm. And, the courts are basically saying, well, it's perfectly okay for us to be polluting the rest of the world. We're just not allowed to do it here.
Yeah. It's just a real plague, some of the people we have influencing things and having power to make these types of decisions. Right. You were very enamored with the amount of time we had left, which we still have at least about 15 minutes.
Yes. So
I think what is it you wanted to get to?
I think it's a good time for us to throw forward in terms of what's going to be happening as we go into 2025, which I think is going to be a fairly significant shift from where we were coming into 2024. Of course, the most dramatic thing is going to be the global realignment that takes place once Trump finally gets into office.
Yeah.
The knock-on effect in terms of that around a range of things. So very specifically, I'll touch on some of the things that have been an issue for a while now. And that is that one of the ways in which the U.S. and the Biden administration in particular has been able to exert pressure on the big tech companies is by making use of the fact that they do have as much influence over what happens in Europe as they do. So there has effectively been warfare against the big tech companies in the U.S. that has been spearheaded by the EU. And, we saw, for example, there was, a 15 billion fine that was that Ireland ended up hitting, that the EU hit Apple with for tax avoidance in the case of Ireland, and clearly that was a move to then put pressure on Apple to do things the way in which the EU wanted it to be done. There was, obviously the pressure that was coming onto Twitter, again from the EU, and again, to a lesser extent, Google and Facebook. A lot of those things, which effectively have been a way of preventing those tech companies from doing what they do best, which is to be the best possible tech companies in the world and to make shitloads of money. Because let's be very clear, in as much as Facebook has indulged in rampant censorship of critical information, we saw what they did in terms of COVID, we saw what they did in terms of the electioneering. But again, is this good for business from the point of view of Facebook? No. Were they doing it because of political interference that was exerted based on the fact that you have all of these proxies for the US government, which through their ability to cut back on the profitability of these tech companies in other parts of the world, means that they're then able to have, that the US government is then able to have a disproportionate influence upon these companies. Because at that level, if Apple is going to want to be fighting the EU around unfair fines being imposed on them, and it's not dissimilar to the rubbish that goes down with Nigeria suddenly deciding that foreign companies need to pay arbitrary fines. It's extortion. We know this. And the same thing goes down in terms of the EU. Now you're going to have a scenario where Trump is going to have every incentive to actually tell the EU to back off from preventing these American companies to grow as well as they possibly can. Otherwise, he's going to come down on them at a number of other levels. So I don't think that we should overlook just how significant that is, because a lot of the discussions that currently take place, for example, around Facebook in the UK, particularly around the questions of the debates around immigration, around trans rights, are all of those being policed by social media based on the governments in those countries? Absolutely. Is that likely to be a dramatic change when Trump comes into office? Yes. Does it mean that there's then going to be a knock-on effect in terms of the politics of those countries? Yes. So I think, for example, that if there happens to be, within a short space of time, a breakdown of the UK government, does it mean that with an unfettered social media environment, that the likes of Farage, for example, would suddenly be able to take control of the government of the UK? I see that as a very real possibility. So all of these pieces of the puzzle that just simply emerge from Trump coming into power, and more crucially, the type of people that he's surrounding himself with and the type of policies that they're wanting to bring on board. I don't think yet people have actually grasped the extent to which this is going to have a knock-on effect on so many things around the world. So that's basically my broad brushstrokes. You go.
Okay. I think that's great. I mean, I can't disagree with that. I definitely think there's a few things happening. So let me get to the Trump stuff. Let me talk to the EU stuff, because I think that the clock on the EU is ticking, and it really has been since Brexit. And I think around that time, Ramon and I sort of looked at it and said, surely the EU is done in about 30 years' time. And I think it may have been heavily accelerated. I think outside of Trump, but certainly Trump is a part of this, because you can feel the vibe shift, right? and you're just starting to see, you see in France, the government can't remain together. Now, that's rare. That's 60 years, 65 years. That's never happened in France. And remember what Macron did. He allied with the far left socialists, open sort of socialists, to keep Le Pen out. And he's now Le Pen has sided with the far left socialists to kick out I forget the prime minister's name, but there's very interesting dynamics happening. There's basically populism occurring everywhere in the world, and you may like it, you may hate it. I know that word has been demonized.
Can we just call it for what it is? It's democracy.
Yes. It's what the people want, okay? And sometimes that's a good thing, and sometimes it's a bad thing. And I wish we would be more honest about that. Sometimes populism can be good, and sometimes it can be bad.
Well, as the case of the mustachioed man, in World War II showed us, very clearly.
Yes. So the thing is, but as Trump will show us in the reverse. Okay, he's not going to be Hitler. In fact, we're going to have a booming global economy, what you refer to in terms of the shackles being taken off the tech companies, the shackles being taken off someone like Elon Musk, who seems to have a knack for solving any type of problem you throw at him. He's just probably the world's greatest engineer at the moment. And so I think that's very exciting. Now, that's not all going to happen in 25. But I think we're starting to see massive, massive cracks in the EU. And as I said on the Burning Platform, which we recorded together this past Thursday, the great thing that's happening is it seems like, for certainly the first time in my lifetime, there's a very clear choice. You can choose bureaucrats and, inverted commas, experts, and people who just look at things with common sense, and which usually errs towards freedom, liberty, and capitalism. And those are your choices. And they're very clear now. And they're becoming so clear, certainly in the West. And I really think that that's a positive that's going to happen to Europe. They're going to resist. There's certainly going to be huge resistance. But I think that feeds into what you're talking about. And then, with Trump, there's going to be a knock-on effect of a lot of stuff that happens there. I think global trade has been stifled for a long time. The World Trade Organization is probably the worst thing that ever happened, because they're a middleman for trade agreements. So instead of Kanthan and I can just say to each other, Kanthan, I want to sell you wheat. And you say, cool, I want to sell you grapes. And then we go, cool, I'll sell you wheat, you sell me grapes, we'll agree on price. That doesn't happen anymore. I have to go to the World Trade Organization, tell them I'm a seller of wheat. You go there, tell them you're a seller of grapes. And then there's all kinds of stuff that happens, and middlemen who negotiate, and tariffs, and etc. And so I think that is starting to fall to pieces. Again, bureaucrats, experts. I think that's a great thing. That will be good for the whole world. I think peace, generally peace. So a strong man who says, look, this is the line. And if you step over the line, you're going to lose whatever part of your body's over the line. But if you don't step over the line, we're good. We're all good. And we're not going to have these long-scale wars, because there's no purpose to people just losing their lives endlessly. I fire at you, you fire at me. That's a good thing. Global peace in general, but where it's understood that if you step over a line, you're done for, right? And then just in general, Trump understands that rising tides lift all boats. Yes. And I think, Reagan was demonized for supply side economics, which has been called trickle down as a negative. But that's ridiculous. Everyone knows in their own personal lives that supply side economics works. For example, if your parents are poor, and then over time they do well for themselves, you as a child notice your life improving. The same applies for your society as a whole. And does that solve all problems? No, it doesn't. Does it mean you will get rid of poverty? No, it doesn't. Does it mean you will have reduced Gini coefficients where the rich are distancing themselves from the poor?
The Gini coefficient, I must say, is a crock of shit, and I never accept it.
Of course it is, because the reality is that if Elon Musk becomes the first trillionaire, which he's halfway to doing, but in so doing, he makes it so that, as we've discussed before, I can get on a rocket and fly to London in an hour. What do I care that he's a trillionaire if I suddenly wipe off 14 hours of airport and airplane travel off my life? So I just think it's not just about Trump. it is a general sense of a movement and a change, and you have a choice. You now have a choice. It's very clear the things that seem to work and the things that don't seem to work. Petty fights where very wealthy people get to have wars that go on forever, where the average guy has to go and be murdered, the average woman has to be left without a husband, the average child has to be left without a mother, but someone high up gets to make a lot of money for themselves. Or we all try to benefit to the best of everyone's ability, but you still have to make an effort yourself because personal responsibility and accountability
So
exists.
measurable benefits, I think, we can agree upon. I think that certainly there'll be an overall reduction in the cost of fuel, which is going to be a prosperity boom for people around the world.
Absolutely.
There's going to be, I think that you're going to see a dramatic reduction in the administrative burden upon the pharmaceutical industry, which is going to result in a faster throughput to a number of drugs that are likely to be in a position to disrupt treatments at a significantly lower price point. Because a lot of the way in which this currently has been managed has come entirely on the basis that you've had a couple of giants that have effectively been able to control the entire system.
Yes.
And the regulators have been there essentially to crank up the price of bringing a drug to market to the extent that the overall outcomes for people around the world have tanked spectacularly. Yeah. So again, I think immediately at the point at which you have cheaper drugs, remember that Trump has done that before in his previous term.
He did it with insulin.
Yes, he did it significantly with insulin, which then got reversed under Biden.
Well, it reversed, and then Biden did put it back.
Yes,
and then claimed credit for it.
Yes,
but you talk about drugs, and I think about India, because India's got a booming pharmaceutical industry, and again, it's very difficult to compete with the big boys. But the reality is, if you're a very smart chemist and you've come up with a product that can do incredible things to prevent people from having strokes, for example.
Yes.
I mean, this doesn't exist currently, but if there's a very smart chemist who's figured this out, unless he's with one of the big boys, that drug's never coming to market. And on patent basis, those drugs often get delayed by decades because they'll release they might have multiple molecules. And then they release the least effective molecule, but it's still effective. And then they have a patent for 15 to 20 years, depending on territory. And then after the patent runs out, they release the next one. And I give you an example. There's a whole bunch of anticoagulant drugs where this has happened with. So go look up things called something called Clexane, and then look up something called Xarelto. And Clexane was the drug for a long time to prevent you from clotting. If you had pulmonary emboli and strokes and things like that. And then when it came near its patent end, suddenly they released these novel agents. Things like I'm using a trade name, so they're getting a bit of advertising, but things like Xarelto. And I just wonder how much is sitting in laboratories just waiting to be released. Now, part of the reason that also doesn't happen, one is patents and regulations, and the other thing is you're stopping innovation, because if there's a single guy or a team somewhere who goes, hell, we're going to make these amazing drugs, and they're competing against the big boys, they get squashed out
immediately.
And I think that applies across industries. And so Doge actually, this is perhaps how I'll end. Doge for me is the biggest potential impact the Trump administration is going to make. If 2028 comes around and Vance doesn't win and we go back to a Democrat administration, I don't think they'll win if they go left, but if they come back to the center, they might very well win. And what you'll be choosing between is this innovative approach, which Trump has chosen as part of his second term, versus this old school Francis Fukuyama, the end of history bureaucracy approach. Those are the choices now. And I think the thing that has the biggest chance to make an impact globally is the Department of Government Efficiency. And the reason is because if the American government, they're talking about 70%, 60, 70, 80% even reduction in the government size of government in the US. But if they do it to 40%, half of what the maximum number is, if they reduce the size of the US government by 40% and thereby some of expenditure, let's say 40%, how does any other country in the world
compete,
justify? And that's an Overton window that people in South Africa turn around and go, but why?
But Javier Milei has already opened that door.
He's opened it. Yes. But I think, Argentina's got such a long way to go that if America does it and shows that it's possible, you then have the examples of Milei slashing things. You have the examples of the Americans reducing the size of government, which has never happened. And you have Nayib Bukele cracking down on major problems with common sense practicality, which, of course, Human Rights Watch doesn't like, but works. Right. And I think that's really going to be very, very interesting for the decade ahead, not just 2025. Final thoughts from you?
No, I think that, yes, Doge, I think is definitely going to. But the single thing that I think that's going to make a huge difference is that Europe is going to be whipped into line. It's going to be better for Europe as a direct result of that, because, frankly, a weak Europe doesn't benefit the world at all.
Any weak, large economic zones are not going to benefit people.
The other thing that I'm going to point out is that in as much as Trump is going to make the Suez Canal route safe once again, you are going to have these opening up of alternative routes. So, there's the route that has been planned between India and Israel going through the Middle East. I think that that's going to become a reality in a short space of time. I do think that the entire conflict around the Taiwan Strait is going to be negotiated very quickly by Trump. And the fact that he's invited Xi Jinping to attend his inauguration, I think, is significant, because it's actually saying, I want you to come into my territory and we're going to talk.
Let's be friends.
And I wouldn't go so far as friends.
Yes, but I agree.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as friends. Yeah. Okay, we are, but I think Trump's approach is going to be, we are adversaries, but we are not enemies.
Yes.
And
that's a very good way of putting it.
And let's actually work out a way that we're able to actually work together, but more importantly, so that I can actually shift the balance of trade in favor of the U.S., because right now it's dramatically skewed in your favor, and that's completely unacceptable. And we do know that one of the reasons why China this happens is because of the fact that you deliberately undervalue your currency to keep your costs artificially low so that we're not able to compete. And if you continue doing that, then we're going to hit you with tariffs to level the playing fields. And this is all great stuff.
Last thing, I suppose we'd be remiss not to say something about this. I was going to call it, but the last thing is the media.
Yes.
Because
the media as we knew it, yes.
Yes, they're dead.
Yeah.
I mean, they obviously continue because it's kind of like, I'm sure if you go to your bank account, you should do this in January, by the way. Go to your bank account come the beginning of January and just look at all the debit orders that go off. And just make sure that you know what all those debit orders are and that you still use all of those services. Because often what happens is you would find that actually there's 99 Rand, I still pay for that thing, but I don't use that thing anymore, or I didn't even realize I was paying that, right? Because you might not notice the 99 Rand. Hopefully you're in a fortunate enough position not to notice the 99 Rand or the 30 Rand or whatever it is come off your account. And so that's what's keeping the New York Times and the Washington Post going, all right? And all of these other entities. It's sort of historic. But at the point that people start to analyze, hold on a second, why am I paying for this? At the point the airports around the world decide not to put CNN on all their television screens, it's over. It's over because everyone else has moved on. And I think this started happening a long time ago, but 2024 was the inflection point. And, you know, Elon Musk likes to say X is the media. You are the media now, which he wants to sort of use X for. And I think he's not entirely wrong on that because it's become such a free speech platform. You can find views. I throw back to Syria and Romania. You know, I go there and look for a lot of differing opinions. And it's, you know, smart people put together good information. And so he's not entirely wrong on that. Podcasts. independent journalists. Substack has been an excellent platform. Lots of good people writing stuff on there. Some of them come from the mainstream, you know. You'll find people, and from all perspectives. You know, you've been doing a Substack, essentially, kanthanpillay.com for 20 years.
More than that, yeah.
But that's really what Substack is. It's a whole bunch of yous with interesting takes, interesting views on interesting topics, global topics usually, and that's where the future of media is. And I think it's fantastic because the death knell for media was that they just couldn't help themselves from lying and pushing agendas. And if they just told the truth, they wouldn't be dying, but they're done.
Well, closer to home, City Press has now finally shut down. Well, it's moving entirely.
It's going digital.
It's going entirely to a digital platform, and we all know what that means. Mm-hmm. And how long is it before the rest of the print media in this country actually goes down that pathway? I think, relatively short space of time.
Even the digital media. Even the digital media this year, our own digital media admitted that they're struggling. They're struggling. Yeah. And not with small amounts of money either. But they still can't make ends meet. And to be honest, if the foreign funding gets cut off, some of it already has, if those taps close, you'll see a lot of those close. And I think that's another positive for the world. Even if we just look back at home. If we have an far more open media space where there's not this very large control. Everyone goes to the same website for news, and so the risk of doing that is you get told that a chief of staff is a racist, for example, as opposed to the truth. That's obviously a negative.
We should inform the world that he's still the chief of staff.
He is still the chief of staff.
And you guys' newspapers are shutting down, which is all good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a wonderful thing. I think very, very positive. I know the journalists don't see it that way because they believe that they tell the truth and control the narrative for good. But that's not how it's meant to work. What was
Daily Maverick saying? Defend truth? Yeah.
Yeah.
They were positively salivating at that court case, by the way.
Yeah. I'm sure they were because one of their biggest funding inlets is for climate change propaganda. Mm-hmm. Good. Kanthan, after we had a bit of a rowdy start there, didn't come to blows. Shall we call it for the year? We're not recording another podcast.
We're not recording another podcast this year.
This year, okay.
This year,
sure.
yes.
Some people might have been joyous at that statement I made.
Actually, the comment section has been loving us over the past while. I don't know if you've actually taken a look.
Yes, I have taken a look, and we've got some regulars, and we really appreciate it.
Look, I think one of the things that people really appreciate is the fact that you and I do have these points where we fundamentally disagree, which is important. Yeah, even though you're completely wrong.
Yeah, 100%. Even though you're absolutely mistaken. Mm-hmm. But thank you for the year.
And thank you as well.
Really appreciate it. We started this on we walked into the studio and said, what are we going to talk about? Mm-hmm. That's kind of how we do every week.
And to this day, we never have a plan ahead of time where the conversation's going to go.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And we hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you've had a great 2024. Things are looking up. Yes, there are things, as always, you can be negative about. The uni party GNU is in charge of this country. That's terrible. But
actually,
lots of positives.
I do need to do one last thing, which is...
he's going somewhere. He's getting stuff from his bag. All right. Don't worry, Kevin. We'll just have this dead space. Here he goes.
No.
Here he goes. Here he goes. Wait for it. There it is. There it is.
Okay. And if you're looking to buy presents for your friends, pop by your local bookstore, pick up a copy of How to Fix South Africa, an owner's manual. If you're not able to find it in your favorite bookstore, go to howtofixsa.co.za and you'll get details on how to be able to buy it.
And interestingly enough, forward written by Michael Jordan, who I've seen recently, has had some very good, he's been far more vocal about some very good ideas for how we could fix the economy.
Smart guy.
Highly recommend following him. All right, let's call it. That's it for the year. We've been kicked out of the studio. Thanks so much. And we'll catch you next time. Cheers.
Cheers.